Is she recording two videos on the same day in the same outfit? Yeah, because the lips look real good and we're not going to waste it. So, with that out of the way, let's get to. Hey, friends, it's me, the Ebony Otaku, the well rounded nerd. I wanted to do a reading from one of my favorite books, not just a childhood book, but book in general. And I think it's just another one of those reads that everyone needs to go back to, especially in these weird times that we live in, because it's one of those that was so well written and so far ahead of its time. Kind of like The Giver by Lois Lowry. It was just so far ahead of its time that it wasn't meant for the audience back then. It was really meant for us, and this is one of those books. The Phantom Tollbooth. Have you read it? You should. Let's talk about it first. So, if you've never read this book, you might be familiar with the animated movie, which is actually one of my favorites. It's not 100% what's in the book, but what movie is. They are two different media, and because of that, you have to change how things work. What works in the book doesn't necessarily work on film, and vice versa. So, we're not comparing the two. Let's just get that out of the way. What I love about this book and movie is it is a timeless story, and that's kind of cliche. But when we say timeless, what it really means in this context is that it is a story where lessons can be gleaned. Uh, Almost no matter where you sit on the timeline of modern society. And it is a children's book, technically, but often in children's books, you are going to find the deepest lessons because people who write for children are trying to take adult concepts, because most of the world is adult concepts, and bring them into a learning capacity for someone who has not fully developed physically or mentally. How do you get someone to understand experiences and circumstances that they haven't had yet? I think that's kind of the problem with a lot of the way people try to help young folks is they forget that young people have no experience being grown, but all of us have experience being young. I digress. Anywho, but this is a fascinating book. If you've not read, I'm not going to spoil the entire thing, but there is a chapter in here I want to read that is kind of the crux of the entire story. So, just a little bit of background. Our central character is a young boy named Milo. He's in grade school. We're guessing he's around 10, 11 years old, somewhere in there. And he's just, a regular kid. He goes to school, he has friends, he talks on the phone, he plays the games, whatever, just living that, middle class modern life. And we encounter Milo at the beginning of the story on a day that he is just bored. He can't find anything to do. And it's interesting whether you read the book or watch the film, and the film's animated, and it's one of those good pieces of animation. Anyway, whether it's in the book or the film, it introduces you to the world that Milo has. He has a television in his home. He's a latchkey kid, like a lot of kids are at a certain age. Parents are at work, you're old enough to come home, let yourself in the house, fix yourself a snack, get yourself a bath, go play with your friends. We trust you. Go out in the street, play the kickball, come back in. He's at that age. But he just, between his toys and his television and his books and his friends, he just can't find anything to do. You ever met that kid? I remember being that kid. Mom, Dad, I'm bored. Well, if you can't find nothing to do, I'll find something for you to do. Yeah, yeah. If you were raised when I was raised, yeah, you know what I'm talking about. Well, he is so bored and so listless and just so forlorn and done with the world that a phantom toll booth chooses him for an adventure. Literally, a cardboard toll booth floats through his window while he's on the phone with one of his friends, telling them how bored he is, plants itself in his living room or bedroom, opens itself up, a little car appears, and offers him a chance for an adventure in another world. If this was an anime, it would be called an isekai, an other world anime, because this young man gets transported into another world where there is a problem. It's not like the world you and I live in. It's very fanciful, but everything is very literal. Um, and we're going to get into that in part of the story. But there are two kingdoms that are at war with each other, the world of Dictionopolis and the kingdom of Digitopolis. Dictionopolis values words and letters and language the most, and Digitopolis values numbers, mathematics, and equations the most. Once upon a time, they lived in harmony with one another when the princesses of sweet rhyme and pure reason reigned over the land, and numbers and letters were seen as equals. Then one day, the kings decided to ask the princesses which one is more important, and they said they were of equal value. How dare they? That can't be true. And they banished rhyme and reason. It's one of those books. They banished rhyme and reason. The two kingdoms of Dictionopolis and Digitopolis became mortal enemies to one another, but in all of the lands surrounding them, everything kind of went into chaos. Things that had an order and a purpose before lose their order and purpose because there is no rhyme or reason to the world. And Milo doesn't know any of this when he first goes through the Tollbooth and decides to go on the adventure because he has nothing else to do. But over time, he's joined by some companions. He's introduced to a lot of really interesting characters, and he comes to understand that this world is not the way that it should be. And as he gets to know different characters and understand the world that he's roaming through, all of a sudden he becomes interested and wants to do something to help right this world. I mean, there's a lesson in that already. I mean, it's funny how we don't want to solve our own problems, but we're real good at solving other people's problems. So, at the point in the story that I'm going to read today, Milo is actually in the kingdom of Dictionopolis, and he has, met the ruler of that kingdom along with his current companions who are traveling with him through the lands. And he made the mistake of accidentally stating that, I think numbers are important too. And they throw him in jail for 6 million years. Now, he's not really in there for 6 million years, and that's just something you have to explore as you read the book. But when he's thrown in jail for 6 million years because he dared to say that numbers matter, he runs into a person who was also in the palace dungeon prison named Faintly Macabre. And she has a story for Milo to help him understand why the world is in the state that it's in today. And that's the story that I want to read for you. So let's get to it. The Phantom Tollbooth by Norton Juster, illustrated by Jules Pfeiffer. Chapter 6, Faintly Macabre's Story. Once upon a time, this land was a barren and frightening wilderness whose high rocky mountains sheltered the evil winds and whose barren valleys offered hospitality to no man. Few things grew, and those that did were bent and twisted, and their fruit was bitter as wormwood. What wasn't waste was desert, and what wasn't desert was rock. And the demons of darkness made their home in the hills. Evil creatures roamed at will through the countryside and down to the sea. It was known as the land of Null. Then, one day a small ship appeared in the Sea of Knowledge. It carried a young prince seeking the future. In the name of goodness and truth, he laid claim to all the country and set out to explore his new domain. The demons, monsters, and giants were furious at his presumption and banded together to drive him out. The earth shook with their battle, and when they had finished, all that remained to the prince was a small piece of land at the edge of the sea. "I will build my city here," he declared, and that is what he did. Before long, more ships came bearing settlers for the new land, and the city grew and pushed its boundaries farther and farther out. Each day it was attacked anew, but nothing could destroy the prince's new city. and grow it did. Soon it was no longer just a city, it was a kingdom, and it was called the Kingdom of Wisdom. But outside the walls, all was not safe, and the new king vowed to conquer the land that was rightfully his. So each spring he set forth with his army, and each autumn he returned. And year by year the kingdom grew larger and more prosperous. He took himself a wife, and before long had 2 fine young sons to whom he taught everything he knew, so that one day they might rule wisely. When the boys grew to young manhood, the king called them and said, "I am becoming an old man and can no longer go forth into battle. You must take my place and found new cities in the wilderness, for the kingdom of wisdom must grow." And so they did. One went south to the foothills of confusion and built Dictionopolis, the city of words. And one went north to the mountains of ignorance and built Digitopolis, the city of numbers. Both cities flourished mightily, and the demons were driven back further still. Soon, other cities and towns were founded in the new lands, and at last only the farthest reaches of the wilderness remained to those terrible creatures. And there they waited, ready to strike down all who ventured near or relaxed their guard. The 2 brothers were glad, however, to go their separate ways, for they were by nature very suspicious and jealous. Each had tried to outdo the other, and they worked so hard and diligently that before long their cities rivaled even wisdom in size and grandeur. "Words are more important than wisdom," said one privately. "Numbers are more important than wisdom," thought the other to himself. And they grew to dislike each other more and more. The old king, however, who knew nothing of his son's animosity, was very happy in the twilight of his reign and spent his days quietly walking around and contemplating in the royal gardens. His only regret was that he'd never had a daughter, for he loved little girls as much as he loved little boys. One day, as he was strolling peacefully about the grounds, he discovered 2 tiny babies that had been abandoned in a basket under the grape arbor. They were beautiful golden-haired girls. The king was overjoyed. "They have been sent to me in my old age," he cried, and called the queen, his ministers, the palace staff, and indeed the entire population to see them. "We'll call this one Rhyme and this one Reason," he said. And so they became the Princess of Sweet Rhyme and the Princess of Pure Reason, and were brought up in the palace. When the king finally died, the kingdom was divided between his 2 sons, with the provision that they would be equally responsible for the welfare of the young princesses. One son went south and became Azaz, the unabridged king of Dictionopolis, and the other went north to become the math magician, ruler of Digitopolis. And, true to their words, they both provided well for the little girls, who continued to live in wisdom. Everyone loved the princesses because of their great beauty, their gentle ways, and their ability to settle all controversies fairly and reasonably. People with problems or grievances or arguments came from all over the land to seek advice. Even the 2 brothers, who by this time were fighting continuously, often called upon them to help decide matters of state. It was said by everyone that rhyme and reason answer all problems. As the years passed, the two brothers grew further and further apart, and their separate kingdoms became richer and grander. Their disputes, however, became more and more difficult to reconcile. But always, with patience and love, the princesses set things right. Then, one day, they had the most terrible quarrel of all. King Azaz insisted that words were far more significant than numbers, and hence his kingdom was truly greater than the mathematician. And the mathematician claimed that numbers were more important than words, and hence his kingdom was supreme to Azaz. They discussed and debated and raved and ranted until they were on the verge of blows, when it was decided to submit the question to arbitration by the princesses. After days of careful consideration in which all the evidence was weighed and all the witnesses heard, they made their decision. Words and numbers are of equal value, for in the cloak of knowledge, one is warp and the other woof. It is no more important to count the sands than it is to name the stars. Therefore, let both kingdoms live in peace. Everyone was pleased with the verdict. Everyone but the brothers, who were beside themselves with anger. What good are the girls if they cannot settle an argument in someone's favor? They growled, since both were more interested in their own advantage than in truth. We'll banish them from the kingdom forever. And so they were taken from the palace and sent far away to the castle in the air, and they have not been seen since. That is why today, in all this land, there is neither rhyme nor reason. And what happened to the two rulers? Asked Milo. Banishing the two princesses was the last thing they ever agreed upon, and they soon fell to warring with each other. Despite this, their kingdoms have continued to prosper. But the old city of wisdom has fallen into great disrepair, and there is no one to set things right. So you see, until the princesses return, I shall have to stay here. I love this book, and as you can tell, like all of my books I love, it is well worn. It is, yeah, it's been used. I've read it many, many times. I've watched the movie. I actually bought it on my YouTube account just because it was one of those that you just, I think we had the physical media at one point in my childhood, but that's not available anymore. So I'm actually thankful for streaming services and download services that let you find things like this. I love both versions, but I highly recommend giving this one a read. It is a message I think rings true no matter where you are on the planet. Without rhyme or reason, things fall into confusion and chaos, and wisdom begins to crumble. That's from a children's book. Okay. So, great read for families, great read for kids, great read for anyone. You're going to encounter some really clever writing in this book and some very cleverly written characters. If you're someone who likes the writing style of, say, Tolkien, you'll really love the style in this book. Not as verbose as Tolkien, to be fair, because Tolkien can take like 14 pages to go from one side of the room to the other with a character, but that beautiful cadence that lets you follow writing really, really well, those clever namings and that sort of thing, good, that's what you have in this book, and it teaches a really good lesson. And look at that. I'm kind of proud of myself. I didn't take 75 minutes to do that one either. So I'll put this one up sometime over the weekend. I'll set it up to premiere to the peoples. But I hope you enjoyed that. There'll be other English lit books that I read from, just like I'm reading from Warhammer and stories from female Asian authors. Look forward to the Ruyu's Royal Love in the Palace series starting. I think I have figured out how to make the voice and editing all line up the way I wanted. Like I said in one of my videos, I had this whole thing done where I was going to introduce to really start going in deep, and the audio messed up. So I got to remember all of those nuggets of wisdom I said before and see if I can reproduce it. So I hope you enjoyed that. If there's another book series or book that you'd like me to investigate or explore, feel free to chime in the comments. Please like, comment, subscribe, and share. I hope you enjoyed it. See you in the next one.